Hey, I'm Tiffany Harlick. I'm a beekeeper and honey producer in the Texas Big Country. We operate ag yards in both Taylor and Callahan counties that are honey producing, and we also have an Adopt a Hive program. We believe in sustainable practices that keep bees happy and healthy, and I'm glad you're here. And today we're talking about honey. So I have a fun presentation for you and hope you can pick up some things that you might not have known before. And with that, I'm just going to share my screen, click present, and get started here. So here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about some honey trivia, just some fun facts. We're going to talk about the state of the honey market. I'm going to give you some ideas around medicinal honey, different types of honey, and how we do honey tasting events. If that's something you'd like to do, please drop me a note, let me know, email me. And how we harvest honey. So how you harvest honey will determine what type of hive setup that you want to get if you're a new beekeeper. So it's worth kind of thinking this all the way through. Um, One fun fact is that beekeepers live longer. There was a study done in Malaysia where they were looking at beekeepers versus non-beekeepers, and what they found is that the telomeres, which are the end caps of the chromosomes, they get shorter the older we get, but beekeepers have longer telomeres and they actually live longer. Is that due to medicinal honey? Is it due to bee venom therapy and getting stung maybe a little bit more? But yeah, beekeepers do live longer, and that's a fun fact for you. A couple of more fun facts is that it takes a honeybee her entire life to make 1/12 of a teaspoon. So it takes 12 bees their entire life, right, to make 1 teaspoon. To make 1 pound of honey, 2 million flowers are visited. This is 2 pounds of honey. You can see part of it has started the crystallization process and part of it's still liquid. Honey will crystallize when it has a certain glucose level. So it's not about aging or time, but about chemistry and the glucose level that will cause it to crystallize. So depending on what is being pollinated and what sugars are being brought in and the chemistry, your honey will crystallize or not, depending on the glucose levels. If your honey crystallizes and you don't want it to, you can simply put it in a pot of hot water, and you want to make sure that the honey doesn't reach over 121 degrees so that you keep all of the enzymes right where they're intact and healthy and still going to have medicinal qualities. But this is 2 pounds of honey right here. So 4 million flowers were required to make this jar. Um, Bees are going to fly over 55,000 miles to bring you 1 pound of honey. And how many flowers does a honeybee visit during one collection trip? That's going to vary, right, depending on different factors. As she flies over a flower, that flower consciousness is going to say, hey, I'm available for pollination, pick me, the energetics go out, the bee receives the information, comes down, and starts the pollination process. Or that flower is going to say, we're closed for business, we don't have anything for you. The bee's going to fly around and find something that is. So it kind of depends, right? But here's, some fun facts for you, some numbers. These are from honey.com, by the way. How many honey producing colonies are there in the United States? Better than, 2.5 million. So 2.5 million colonies that we know about that are recorded as of 2010, right? I realize that as you're watching this, that sounds super dated, but it does take a while to get all of the data in. And this is still pretty accurate. So you can factor between 2 and 3 million colonies are producing honey in the United States. Oh, quick little history, right? This is the man of Bykor holding on to the honey. This is the famous cave painting. This is the earliest known depiction of bees and the oldest evidence of honey consumption. So 8,000 BCE, Spain. The next time we know about honey is, or in terms of our record of organized beekeeping that we know about, happened in ancient Egypt in 3500 BCE. There is, yes, Alexander the Great was transported, submerged in honey upon his death in 323 BCE. One of my one of my favorite funny honey fun fact stories is that in 400 BCE, Persia, right, some of the Persian generals defeated some of the Greek army by feeding them mad honey. So the armies are marching in, they leave out bats of mad honey, which is basically uh, honey that is going to give you a trip, right? Like a psychedelic trip. And so the soldiers drink the mad honey, they go on their trip, and the other soldiers come in and invade and take care of business. So honey's been used in warfare. And then in 1450 AD, we see examples of beehives with the Mayan honey god. So there's much, much more to honey history. These are just a few little blips for you to enjoy. Also, when people are learning about honey, Honeygate is kind of an interesting thing to talk about. So in February of 2013, the Justice Department charged two major honey importers with Operation Honeygate. It's a honey laundering scheme, and it helped the companies avoid $180 million in shipping duties. They hid the honey's true origin, and a lot of people felt like it was not real. So it's one of the biggest incidents of food fraud in United States history, and we still have fake honey in the grocery stores. This is harvested from bees in our area by me, by my apprentices, right? This is hive to table, but a lot of honey producers get to a certain threshold where they owe the store more honey and they don't have it, or they have a demand and the supply is down, so they'll buy honey from other places. Now, this is fine, right? If you're saying, hey, we're out, but this is honey from another spot. But a lot of times, like the store-bought honey, there will be mixtures of honey, high fructose corn syrup, honey from other areas, from other countries, and it's not that raw local honey that you're expecting. And there's also no real laws in honey labeling. So there can be a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake honey out there. So you want to know your beekeeper and you want to support your beekeeper. Honey is the third most faked food in the world behind milk and olive oil. The exact amount of fake honey is hard to calculate, but there are a couple of different numbers and projections for you. And they make it really hard to trace where the honey came from. So it's just a very fraudulent activity. But if you think about it, there's about 650 million pounds of honey a year consumed in the United States. Yet the United States only produces about 100 to 120 million pounds per year. So your takeaway is the vast majority of honey that's sold in the United States is not made here, right? So what was going on in the honey market recently? Again, this is going to be dated information to you, and I'll provide more updates as we get them in the industry. But yeah, there has been honey prices fluctuate like anything. They go up, they go down. In the grocery store, the honey prices are climbing. It's hard to compete when people, like the average consumer, is going to go to the store, see a cheaper thing of honey, not realize it's actually not local raw organic honey, and not want to pay the price difference for something that is. So yeah, something that changed in 2023 was there was a big push for specialty honey. So things like this, like Hacienda Harlech honey. Here's our large, here's our medium, and here's our small. So super cute. It was a tough year for crops in 2023. It was one of the most difficult years on record. And then, now in 2025, we're having some of the largest bee losses, honeybee colony losses ever reported. So a state as a whole, we did 1.1 to 2 million pounds of honey. That's a lot. Usually Texas does 8 million, right? That's a lot more. So you could see there was a huge dip in honey production. And just fun fact, most of the state's production is in South Texas, where they grow a lot of tallow. And so you want to keep your eyes on the tallow eradication laws, because if we don't have tallow, we also don't have as much honey, right? So what's the consumer thinking about honey? There's still positive associations, even though there's price fluctuations. Honey does better than other sweeteners. It performs better. There's a lot of bad press around artificial sweeteners. It's next to sugar. So every other year it goes back and forth. Consumers like honey better, then they like sugar better, right? 58% of people report using honey multiple times a month. Like, I like it in my tea, I like it in this. It's not just kind of a one-time thing. They're using it throughout the month. 46% of people think that using honey is good for bees, and the majority don't know or think that it could be bad for bees, right? So some of the beekeeping practices to take honey and then feed bees sugar water turns it into not honey, it turns it into funny honey. and it turns it into kind of like a forced commercial situation. There are sustainable practices. We don't have to do it that way, right? But a lot of people don't realize that, taking honey from the bees could be bad for them, depending on the practices and the management styles that are being used, right? Two-thirds of shoppers say that they are aware that honeybees are having a hard time, and awareness is good because it helps us fund research. Where are the United States consumers buying honey? The grocery store, the supermarkets, and the farmers markets, which is awesome, right? Because what other food product would rank that high? So 25% of people that responded said they get honey from the farmers market, which is awesome. And so what do consumers look for as a criteria to purchase honey? They want the price to be low, the container to be cute, they want it to be labeled as pure, unfiltered, or raw. And people are buying smaller sizes of honey, and they're trading more expensive these glass jars for plastic jars. Now, I don't like to use plastic in my world when possible. It's unavoidable. Plastic isn't, totally. I don't have it out of everything, but I do think that, right, if we can do these glass jars, when you do have the situation when honey crystallizes, if your honey has that high glucose level, you're going to be able to dig a spoon in there. It's going to be a lot easier than having a plastic jar full of rock hard honey that's crystallized, right? So for me and my product and my area, we have a lot of cotton honey, hairy vetch, we have wildflowers, we have mesquite, and our honey in Taylor County tends to crystallize. Our honey in Callahan County hasn't crystallized in 5 years. So it all just depends. And so for me, a glass jar that you could dip your spoon in was an easier way to go. So lots of considerations. Why do we like honey? The consumers say that taste. They like that it's a healthy sweetener. They like that it helps the digestive system. They like that it's natural and unprocessed. They like the therapeutic qualities. But according to the National Honey Board, taste was the #1 reason people were buying honey. If you haven't checked out Dr. Farhat Ozturk, he is a friend of mine. He is a researcher at UTSA. And I adore learning about medicinal honey, specifically from him and his research. A lot of people think that Manuka honey is the most medicinal because they had an excellent marketing campaign, and it's not medicinal, but Dr. Ozturk is finding that some of the Central Texas honey are outperforming Manuka in the medicinal qualities. So what can you use honey for medicinally? You can put it on your wounds. You can make a wash with honey and water and put it in open sores. I'm not a doctor. I'm not offering medical advice. But I would love to go through each of these, but this presentation is just meant to give you a quick splash, right, of info. Honey is gastroprotective, right? It's good for your digestive system. If you put it in a little bit of warm water, not hot, but warm, it'll help things move. If you put it in a little cold water, it'll help plug things up if you need to, right? But yes, the bee venom therapy, honey has been incredibly helpful for the Lyme disease community, cancer survivors. It's anti-inflammatory, it's antimicrobial, anti-diabetic, anti-cancerous, antioxidant. Really, antioxidant is where we need the help, right? It prevents aging, it helps all the free radicals. It reduces inflammation, right? And this is what we need for disease prevention and healing. So lots of things to go into there, but the entire apiary is medicinal. It's not just honey. We could talk about pollen or propolis, right? We make propolis tinctures at our honey studio. This is for sore throats. We can use bee venom therapy. We can use the wax medicinally to make salves. Some people use royal jelly. Some people use the bee air. Some people, of course, do the sound therapy too with the buzzing. And going into the hive at all is a totally Zen experience, or it can be with the right beekeeper, right? So a couple of different types of honey to consider. You've got in Texas, or where I am at least, not all areas of Texas, we can get spring honey and fall honey. So fall honey isn't guaranteed because of the weather, and we want to leave as much honey in the hives in the fall as possible because they're going into the winter. But if there's a second nectar flow, or if there's if there's a huge surplus, it is okay to take some in the fall. I usually harvest my fall honey in the spring of next year because at that point I know that my bees have made it through the winter, they don't need those resources, and I can safely pull from them. So at the same time, it's like last year I left too much in and then they were honey bound. They couldn't move around in there. So I needed to rescue them and get the honey out faster. So there's lots of different strategies as you're considering harvesting honey and the different types of honey. They're going to taste different because the floral sources are different. There's a wider range of sources where we are in the spring than there are in the fall. In the spring, yes, bee balm, mesquite, wildflowers, what's popping now, right? Like the dandelions, the henbit. And then in the fall, we have a totally different flavor profile, right? Perhaps a second mesquite bloom, goldenrod, the asters, and the fall flowers, so some of the sunflowers, cotton. Usually our cotton is done by August here, so that's another one to consider. This is a blend of stuff, right? But then we also have the consideration, is it monofloral or a varietal? Is it really just like one main source? Of course, it's never going to be a pure one thing because most of us producing honey are not in a monocrop field situation where there's no other thing being pollinated, right? So it's never truly one thing. So when you're buying a varietal, it's the majority, right? It's the majority that of floral sources that they're considering. But most honeys, right? All honeys, question mark, are polyfloral. And this is essential for immune responses and the pharyngeal gland growth and the things that the bees need. It's like you need a full diet. You can't just eat one thing and expect to get a full range of health. So it's best for them to have a variety of resources, right? The different floral sources create different color and different flavor and different texture. You can also consider creamed honey and crystallization. Um, all honeys will crystallize eventually. That's not necessarily true. It has to do with the glucose levels. So glucose versus fructose. If you've got, yeah, so I've covered that already. Yeah. And I also want to say that, yep, here's a cute little recipe for creamed honey from honestcooking.com. Creamed honey doesn't have butter or milk or anything in it. It's just honey. But like sourdough, it needs a starter or a seed. So if you can find some creamed honey you like and get a seed or a starter from that producer, they can teach you how best to use that product. But here's another, way to play with it if you want to practice your creamed honey skills, right? So some different things you can do with honey, the recipes and crafts, right? There you could do grafting for wax for fruit trees. You could do beard balm. You could do cutting board like sealants. You could do honey butter, honey mustard candles, lotion bars. There's all kinds of fun things you can do to play with honey and wax. Propolis and all of the things that come from the hive, again, are totally medicinal. If you want to take a honey sensory class, you're going to be using all of your senses, right, to enjoy the honey. So the eyes taste first. There was a study done when people were given 3 sugar solutions, blue, clear, and red, they decided that the red was the sweetest, even though they were all the same, right? So the eyes, the color and then the interpretation of the eyes makes that decision that one thing is sweeter than the other. So the eyes taste first. I'll show you the PFUN system in a second. Smell, 70% of what we taste starts in our nose. And so when we do honey sensory class, I have a fun aroma activity for everybody. And then taste. And so the 5 primary tastes are going to be bitter, sour, sweet, salty, and umami. And we look at the honey wheel for that. So here's that PFUN scale that describes color, and then the honey wheel that describes flavor. And these are fun things to use when you are doing your own honey tasting and honey pairing. So there's a lot that goes into the consideration of what is going to pair well. What is it, a certain nut or dried fruit or cheese that is going to pair well with which particular flavor of honey you have going on. And that's going to change in every jar. Every jar is a little bit different, which is what makes it so boutique and beautiful. Harvesting honey, when do we do that? We need to pay attention to the weather and the seasons. We want 90% of our honey, this is illustrating capped honey here. We want it to be capped. We don't want it to be open nectar, because when it's open and it's unripened honey, that can cause fermentation, and bacteria and yeast can live on those. And we don't want that unless you're trying to produce mead, which I am not, right? So we want our honey to be capped. How? It's just going to depend on your equipment and your bottling procedures. So this is a frame from like a typical Langstroth box. With this, there's many different things you could do. You could use a knife, an uncapping knife, and just take all the caps off. You could use a roller and poke holes in all of these caps, and then you could put them in an extractor, whether it's a hand crank or an electric extractor. And you could be, using the extractor to spin the honey out. Once the honey is spun out, it would go through a filtration process. Again, no heating, just filters and spinning the honey. What's going to be left is that comb, that drawn comb that you can then go back to the beehive with and let them use as a resource to continue building and letting their colony thrive, right? They don't have to start over and build comb from scratch. If you are using top bar hives, I use both Langstroth and top bars, but in a top bar, you can't spin and you can't use an extractor like that. So you're using a crush and strain method. So we're taking the honey out, putting it in like a sort of cheesecloth or paint strainer bag, straining it through, like I do, like a 7-layer filtration system. So it's going through lots of different filters to get that pure, raw, beautiful liquid gold that we all love to taste, right? So there's many more bottling procedures, and it depends if you're harvesting a couple of frames a year versus a couple of thousand frames a year. But that should get you started. So a lot of people want to know what they can do for the bees. You can provide floral sources, different floral sources all year round. So think about when the bees are struggling the most is when they're coming out of winter, they're looking for those first blooms. They need to get out and do their cleansing flights. The foragers need to go about and find what sources are there. So what's blooming earlier in the year? Things like thyme, the dandelions coming up first. And then also if you plant a shrub, a bush, or a tree, there's many floral sources on that. So it's not just one little flower, it's like many flowers. They call it a meadow in the sky, right? Some beekeepers do, some arborists do. So yeah, you want to consider floral sources that they can access year round. You want to have consistent water, and I say with sticks. This is a bad example, but if a bee flew into this water hole, it couldn't get out, it would need some kind of stick or stone to be able to crawl its way out. Don't buy grocery store honey, find a beekeeper and support the bees, the people that are really taking care of the bees. Learn beekeeping, right? Understand what's going on. Did you know that the female worker bee, as she ages, gets different jobs? She starts out as a nurse bee, but she's going to go through her life and graduate to all of the different jobs. She's going to be an undertaker bee, taking the dead out. She's going to be a guard bee. She's going to be an air conditioning bee. She's going to be somebody that brings nectar into the hive and pollen into the hive. She's going to graduate to become a forager. So the foragers are the old ladies. Their lifespans are much shorter in the summer versus the winter. What you feed them, if you are doing supplementary feed because maybe your bloom hasn't started yet, creates biological mechanisms in them to make different functions happen. So know why you're doing everything, right? Know what you're doing, why you're doing it. When you open the hive, they always give me some challenge and some surprise. Bees like to swarm. Bees like to make bees. Bees want to reproduce. They don't necessarily want to make honey. That's their food source, right? But they aren't living for that purpose and that purpose only. They're living to reproduce their genetics. So understanding how and when they swarm and how you might prevent that if you want to, or how you might encourage that if you want to. There are so many different practices. I hope I've inspired you to enjoy a little bit about the world of beekeeping. Definitely another thing you can do for the bees is to not use pesticides, right? No chemicals. And you can ask your neighbors if they're going to be using chemicals. to let you know about a week ahead of time so that you can manage your bees properly and not expose them to that. So I'm Tiffany again. I'm at haciendaharlick.com. That's my last name. And yeah, we love you. We love the bees. We're glad you're here. Hope you've learned something new about honey. If you are inspired to maybe adopt a hive or learn beekeeping, we would love to continue to teach you more. Um, yeah, so I think that's it, guys. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thanks for being here on your beekeeping journey. The bees are architects of our ecosystem, and they're the guardians of life itself. And so I think it's really important, a really important mission to keep learning about them and having fun in agriculture, and supporting the bees and the different pollination services and the different plants and the different food systems. And yeah, that's what I'm passionate about. All right, until next time, take care.